Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to Clara Bennett. They thought she was only there to carry tea. That was the first mistake. Clara Bennett stepped into the private conference room of the Moretti estate with a silver tray balanced in both hands. The tray was polished so brightly it reflected the cold chandelier light above her, but no one looked at the tea. No one looked at the cups. They looked at her. A black, maid in a simple gray uniform. Quiet shoes. Natural curls pinned back. Eyes lowered, not because she was weak, but because she had learned long ago that rich men felt safer when they believed working women were invisible. The room was filled with power. A long black table stretched from one end of the room to the other. Heavy leather chairs lined both sides. The fireplace burned low behind a wall of carved marble. 2 guards stood by the door, hands folded in front of them, eyes cold and trained. On the table were contracts, sealed folders, crystal glasses, and a silence so sharp it seemed to cut the air. At the head of the table sat Adrian Moretti, the most feared mafia boss on the East Coast. He did not need to raise his voice to own a room. His stillness did that for him. Charcoal suit, black shirt, silver watch, dark eyes that made men choose their words carefully. One hand rested beside an untouched glass of whiskey, the other near a folder stamped with the Moretti family crest. Across from him sat 3 Korean businessmen from Seoul. At their center was Chairman Han, an elderly man with calm eyes and a face carved by years of discipline. Beside him were 2 younger executives, both tense, both speaking softly in Korean. Between them stood Victor Hale, Adrian's trusted translator. Smooth hair, silver glasses, a smile too polished to be honest. The meeting had already gone wrong before Clara entered. Adrian leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. "You brought me here to insult me?" Victor turned to the Korean delegation and translated quickly. Then he listened to Chairman Han's reply, nodded, and faced Adrian again. "He says your offer is weak, Mr. Moretti. He says the Moretti family is not what it used to be." The room chilled. One of Adrian's capos shifted in his chair. Another lowered his hand toward the inside of his jacket, more out of habit than threat. Chairman Han frowned, confused by the reaction. He spoke again in Korean, slower this time, his tone careful. Clara heard every word, and her fingers tightened around the tray, because that was not what he had said, not even close. Chairman Han had not insulted Adrian. He had warned him. He had said the documents Adrian received were false. He had said someone inside the Moretti organization had changed the terms before the meeting. He had said there was a traitor close enough to touch the table. But Victor smiled and turned the warning into poison. "He says perhaps you misunderstood the seriousness of this negotiation," Victor translated. "He says maybe you should listen more and speak less." A low sound moved through the room. Not a gasp, not a shout, something worse. The sound of powerful men preparing to stop pretending they were civilized. Clara moved around the table, placing cups silently in front of men who did not know she understood the language they were using. One of Adrian's men, Rocco, smirked as she passed. "Careful, Clara," he muttered. "This is grown men's business." Another man chuckled. "She probably thinks Seoul is a perfume brand." A few laughs followed. Small, cruel, lazy. Clara kept her face still. She poured the tea with steady hands, though her chest had begun to tighten. Chairman Han glanced at her, not with mockery, with recognition, as though he had seen that kind of humiliation before and knew exactly how much strength it took not to answer it. Victor continued, lie after lie, twisted sentence after twisted sentence. And with each false translation, Adrian Moretti's patience thinned. Finally, Adrian stood. The chair legs scraped against the floor. Everyone stopped breathing. "I don't waste time with men who disrespect me in my own house." His voice was quiet. That made it worse. Chairman Han looked alarmed. He spoke quickly in Korean. Victor translated without blinking. "He says perhaps you are too emotional to do business." Adrian buttoned his suit jacket. "I'm done." He turned toward the door. And that was when Clara Bennett placed the teapot down. Porcelain against silver. A soft sound, but every man in the room heard it. Then Clara lifted her eyes and spoke in perfect Korean. "Chairman Han did not insult you, Mr. Moretti. Your translator did." The room went silent. For 8 months, Clara Bennett had worked inside the Moretti estate without being truly seen. That was how she survived. She arrived before sunrise, when the mansion still smelled of lemon polish, cold stone and expensive silence. She walked through side entrances, not front doors. She used staircases hidden behind paneled walls. She ate in the staff kitchen, never the dining room. She knew how to disappear before important guests arrived, and how to reappear only when a glass needed filling or a plate needed clearing. The Moretti estate was not just a house. It was a kingdom built from marble and secrets. There were rooms Clara cleaned but never used. Chairs she dusted but never sat in. Paintings she straightened that cost more than the block where she grew up. Men came and went at strange hours, speaking in low voices, carrying leather folders, and wearing watches that could have paid her brother's medical bills for a year. Clara learned quickly. In that house, people respected power. They rarely respected service. Some ignored her completely. Some gave orders without looking up. Some left muddy footprints on floors she had just polished, then smiled as if making her clean twice was entertainment. Rocco, one of Adrian's senior men, liked to call her Little Shadow. "Because you're always there," he once said, laughing with a cigar between his fingers, "but nobody cares." Clara had said nothing. Silence was cheaper than pride, and she had bills pride could not pay. What no one in the Moretti estate knew was that Clara Bennett had once stood in university lecture halls translating Korean diplomatic speeches in real time. She had been brilliant once, though she hated thinking of it that way, because brilliance sounded like something that belonged to another life. Before the uniform, before the unpaid hospital notices, before her mother's voice became weak on the phone. Her mother, Evelyn Bennett, had been a language professor. She taught Korean, French, and comparative literature at a small college in Maryland. Their apartment had always been full of books, sticky notes, dictionaries, and the smell of ginger tea. Evelyn believed language was not just grammar. It was respect. "Baby," she used to tell Clara, tapping a finger gently against her daughter's forehead. "When you learn someone's language, you learn how they carry pain." So Clara learned. She learned Korean first because her mother loved its rhythm. She learned the soft respect built into honorifics, the way a single ending could show age, distance, warmth, or contempt. She learned how business leaders spoke when they wanted to be polite but firm. She learned how frightened men sounded when they were trying not to show fear. By 22, Clara had a scholarship for international interpretation. By 23, she had lost it. Her mother got sick. Her younger brother Marcus developed a heart condition that required specialists they could not afford. Clara left school just for one semester. That semester became 2, then 3, then a life. She worked nights at a hotel, mornings at a diner, weekends cleaning offices. Eventually, a private staffing agency offered her a position at the Moretti estate. The pay was higher than anything else. The rules were simple. Do your job. Ask nothing. Repeat nothing. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Voss, had looked Clara in the eye on her first day and said, "In this house, invisible women live longer." Clara never forgot that. So she became invisible. She learned which doors not to open, which conversations to walk away from, which men liked coffee black, which men liked fear, and which men were foolish enough to think cruelty made them important. And then there was Adrian Moretti. He was different from the others, though not softer. Never softer. Adrian did not waste words. He did not flirt with the staff or throw money around for applause. He rarely looked at Clara, but when he did, his eyes were not careless. They noticed things. Once, an older gardener collapsed near the east courtyard. The other men complained about the delay. Adrian said only one sentence. "Call my doctor." The gardener's hospital bill vanished. Another time, a guard mocked a delivery boy's stutter. By sunset, that guard no longer worked there. Clara had watched these things from corners. Adrian Moretti was dangerous, but he was not empty. That was why, when she heard Victor hail corrupt Chairman Han's words, she felt something inside her rise. Not anger exactly. Something older. Something her mother had planted. A refusal. Because Clara knew what it felt like to have your voice taken and replaced with someone else's lie. And in that conference room, Victor was not just translating badly. He was stealing truth. So Clara stood there, tray in hand, while men laughed at her. She listened. She waited. She measured the danger. Then Adrian reached the door, and Clara made the first visible choice of her life inside that house. She spoke. No one moved after Clara spoke Korean. For one breath, the room seemed unable to understand what had happened. Not the words, some understood those. Not the voice. Clara's voice was clear, steady, almost gentle. It was the fact that the voice belonged to her. The maid. The woman they had dismissed as furniture with hands. Rocco's smile faded first. His mouth stayed half open, as if the laugh had died before it could leave. Victor Hale turned slowly toward Clara. Behind his silver glasses, his eyes sharpened. For the first time that evening, he looked genuinely afraid. Adrian Moretti stopped near the door. His back remained to the room for a moment. One hand rested on the brass handle. His shoulders were still, but the silence around him changed. The anger that had been moving outward suddenly turned inward, focused, controlled. Slowly, he turned around. "What did you say?" Clara felt every eye land on her. The guards. The capos. The Korean businessman. Victor. Adrian. She had spent 8 months avoiding this exact F. She folded her hands in front of her apron. "I said Chairman Han did not insult you, sir." Mr. Hale mistranslated him. Victor gave a short laugh. "Too quick. Too thin. Mr. Moretti, with respect, she's a maid." She probably memorized a phrase from some drama and thought. Clara turned her head slightly toward him and spoke in Korean again, this time with formal precision. "Chairman Han said the documents were altered after leaving his office. He said someone close to Mr. Moretti replaced page 12, section 4. He said if Mr. Moretti signed tonight, he would be walking into a trap." Chairman Han's face changed. Recognition, relief, then concern. He leaned forward, studying Clara as if she had just stepped out from behind a curtain no one knew existed. "You understand us?" he asked in Korean. Clara bowed her head respectfully. "Yes, Chairman. I understood everything." One of the younger Korean executives whispered something under his breath. Clara answered without looking at him. "No, sir. I am not from Seoul. I studied interpretation under Professor Evelyn Bennett." The elderly chairman's eyes widened. Evelyn Bennett. A softness crossed his face. She translated at the Washington Summit 15 years ago. Clara's throat tightened, but she did not let the emotion show. "She was my mother." The room, already silent, became something deeper than silent. Even men who did not understand Korean felt the shift. Adrian took one step back toward the table. His eyes never left Clara. "Translate what you just said," he ordered. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Clara turned to him. "Chairman Han knows my mother's work." He recognized her name. A flicker passed through Adrian's expression, too fast to name. Then his gaze cut to Victor. "And the rest?" Victor lifted both hands, smiling with desperate elegance. "Adrian, this is absurd. We are letting domestic staff interfere with an international negotiation. She has no credentials, no clearance, no reason to, no reason." Adrian said. The two words landed cold. Victor stopped. Adrian walked back to the head of the table, but he did not sit. He stood behind his chair like a judge who had not yet announced the sentence. "Clara." It was the first time he had ever said her name in that room. "Not you. Not Maid. Her name. Tell me exactly what Chairman Han said." Clara swallowed. Then she stepped closer to the table. The men who had laughed at her now watched her as if she held a match over gasoline. She began carefully. "Chairman Han said his company agreed to your original terms. He said the version presented tonight contains changes he never approved. He specifically mentioned shipping access through Busan, profit percentages, and a security clause that gives control to a third party if either side withdraws." Adrian's jaw tightened. Clara continued. "He also said he tried to warn you privately, but every message sent through Mr. Hale came back distorted. He believes someone wanted this meeting to collapse." Chairman Han nodded slowly. Victor's face lost color. Adrian looked down at the contract on the table, then at Victor, then at Clara. For the first time since she had entered the room, no one was laughing. The chandelier hummed faintly overhead. Outside, rain tapped against the windows. Inside, the truth stood in a gray maid's uniform with her hands folded calmly in front of her. And the room had no choice but to listen. Adrian Moretti did not explode. That was what made him terrifying. Some men shouted when betrayed. Some threw glasses, slammed fists, filled the room with noise to prove they were still in control. Adrian did none of that. He simply pulled his chair back and sat down. The movement was calm, almost graceful, but everyone in the room felt the danger sharpen. "Bring me page 12, he said. Rocco moved first, grateful to have something to do. He opened the black folder in front of Adrian and removed the contract, flipping through the pages with hands that were not as steady as he wanted them to be. Victor tried to speak. "Adrian, Before this becomes a misunderstanding. Adrian lifted one finger. Victor closed his mouth. That single gesture did what shouting could not. Rocco placed page 12 on the table. Adrian looked at it. Then he looked at Chairman Han. Clara, without being asked, translated softly. Chairman Han says the original agreement gave both parties equal withdrawal rights. This version gives control of the shipping channel to a company called Northline Holdings if the Korean side withdraws. Adrian's eyes moved to the clause. Northline Holdings. The name meant nothing to Clara, but it meant something to the men in the room. One of the capos muttered a curse under his breath. Another looked toward Victor, and this time, not with confusion, with suspicion. Adrian's voice stayed low. Who added Northline? Victor adjusted his glasses. I would need to check the document history. Legal teams make revisions all the time. These contracts pass through many hands. Chairman Han spoke again, his tone firmer now. Clara translated. He says Northline Holdings is connected to the Varga family. The name fell across the room like a blade. Even Clara knew that name. The Varga family had been circling Moretti territory for months. Quietly, patiently, not with open threats, but with pressure. Lost suppliers, missing shipments, deals collapsing at the last moment. Adrian had suspected outside sabotage. He had not suspected the door had been opened from inside. Victor shook his head. That is speculation. Clara turned toward him. In Korean, Chairman Han said he has records. Victor's eyes snapped to hers. For half a second, the mask dropped. There it was. Not irritation. Not embarrassment. Fear. Adrian saw it too. Records? Adrian asked. Chairman Han reached into his leather briefcase. One of Adrian's guards moved forward, but Adrian held up a hand. The chairman withdrew a slim folder and slid it across the table. Clara translated as he spoke. He says his security team intercepted a message 3 nights ago. Someone using an encrypted account sent the altered contract to a Varga contact before this meeting. Adrian opened the folder. Printed pages. Transaction trails. Email fragments. A hotel receipt. A bank transfer routed through 2 shell companies. No one breathed. Adrian read in silence. The rain outside grew louder, tapping against the glass like impatient fingers. Then he stopped on one page. His expression did not change. But Victor took one step back. That step betrayed him more than any confession could have. Adrian looked up. Why is your name here, Victor? Victor's lips parted. Nothing came out. Rocco, the same man who had laughed at Clara minutes earlier, stared at the documents, then at Victor, then lowered his eyes. The room had begun rearranging itself. Not physically, morally. A few minutes ago, Clara had been the lowest person in the room. Now every man there was waiting for her voice to tell them what was true. Chairman Han spoke again, slower this time, choosing his words with care. Clara translated. He says he did not come here to insult you, Mr. Moretti. He came because he believed you were being surrounded by people who profit from your anger. He says a man who leaves the room angry becomes easier to rob than a man who stays to listen. The words struck something in Adrian. His eyes moved to Clara. For the first time, not as a boss looking at staff, but as a man forced to confront the fact that the person he had overlooked had just saved him from walking willingly into a trap. Victor tried one last time. This is ridiculous. You are going to trust a housemaid over me. Clara did not flinch, but Adrian smiled. Not warmly, not kindly. A cold, narrow smile that made Victor go still. No, Adrian said. I'm going to trust the woman who translated the truth while you sold me a lie. The room went silent again. But this silence was different. The first silence had been shock. This one was judgment. Clara had imagined many ways her job at the Moretti estate might end. Being fired quietly. Being accused of listening too much. Being told to pack her things before sunset. She had never imagined standing at the center of a mafia conference room while men with million-dollar secrets waited for her next sentence. Yet there she was. Gray uniform. Polished black shoes. Hands folded. Voice steady. Adrian pushed the folder toward her. Can you read all of this? Clara looked at the documents. Some were in English. Some in Korean. A few included legal and shipping terms that would have made most people hesitate. She did not. Yes, sir. Victor let out a bitter laugh. Of course she says yes. This is theater now. Adrian did not look at him. Speak again, and you will regret choosing sound over silence. Victor went pale. Clara picked up the first page. The paper trembled slightly, not because her hands were weak, but because the weight of the moment had finally reached her body. She inhaled quietly and began. She translated the intercepted message first. A line about changing the contract before the meeting. A line about provoking Adrian. A line about making sure the old Korean man sounded disrespectful enough to trigger a walkout. Then came the payment record. Then the hotel receipt. Then the name. Victor Hale. No one interrupted her. With each sentence, the room grew smaller around Victor. He seemed to shrink inside his expensive suit, the polished translator becoming exactly what he had tried to make Clara appear to be: exposed, powerless, and suddenly very visible. Adrian leaned back in his chair. His face was unreadable, but his fingers tapped once against the table. Only once. Everyone noticed. Clara continued. The message says, Moretti's pride will do the work for us. She stopped. Those words hung in the air. For the first time that night, Adrian looked wounded. Not weak. Never weak. But struck somewhere beneath the armor. Because the betrayal was not only in the contract. It was in how well Victor had understood him. His temper. His pride. His habit of walking away before anyone could make him look foolish. The enemy had not just studied his business. They had studied his soul. Chairman Han watched him carefully, then spoke in Korean. Clara translated, softer now. He says power is most dangerous when dishonest men learn how to guide it. Adrian did not answer immediately. He looked at Victor, then at the men seated along his own side of the table. Some could not meet his eyes. Rocco especially kept his head down. The same man who had mocked Clara now looked ashamed, though shame arrived too late to be noble. Adrian stood. Victor stepped backward. I didn't have a choice, Victor said quickly. The Vargas had leverage. They knew things. They threatened my family. Adrian's expression did not move. So you gave them mine. Victor swallowed. I was trying to survive. Clara lowered the document in her hands. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Adrian turned slightly toward her. What does Chairman Han say should happen now? The question stunned the room. Adrian Moretti, who took advice from almost no one, was asking through Clara. Not around her. Not over her. Through her. Chairman Han answered. Clara listened. Then she translated. He says the agreement can still stand if both sides remove the false clauses and rebuild the terms honestly. But only if you decide tonight whether your pride is louder than your judgment. A dangerous sentence. Several men stiffened. But Adrian did not. He looked at Chairman Han for a long moment. Then at Clara. Something passed across his face. Not softness, exactly, but recognition. He had almost walked out. He had almost handed his enemies exactly what they wanted. And the only person brave enough to stop him was the woman his own men had laughed at. Adrian turned to Rocco. Apologize. Rocco blinked. To who? Adrian's eyes hardened. The room seemed to drop 10 degrees. To Miss Bennett. Rocco looked at Clara. His face burned red. I'm sorry. Clara held his gaze. She did not smile. She did not thank him. She simply nodded once. Because dignity does not beg for apologies. It receives them standing. Adrian turned back to the table. Rewrite the contract. Then he looked at Victor. And remove the traitor from my house. The guard stepped forward. No chaos. No shouting. Just the quiet sound of justice moving across marble. Clara placed the documents back on the table. For the first time since entering the room, she was not holding a tray. She was holding the truth. And every man there knew it. Victor Hale did not fight when the guards reached him. Men like Victor rarely fought with their hands. They fought with smiles, with signatures, with careful words, placed in the wrong ears. But now his words had failed him, and without them, he looked smaller than anyone expected. One guard took his phone. Another removed the silver watch from his wrist, checking for hidden transmitters. Victor's face twisted with humiliation as the same men who once nodded respectfully to him now searched him like a thief. Adrian, Victor said, voice shaking. You know what I've done for this family. Adrian stood at the head of the table, still as a statue. I know what you sold. Victor's eyes darted toward Clara. This is because of her. Because a maid decided to play translator. The word struck the room with a familiar ugliness. A few minutes ago, maybe someone would have laughed. Now no one did. Adrian stepped closer. Say that again. Victor swallowed. Clara watched quietly. She knew men like him. The kind who could not accept being exposed by someone they considered beneath them. To Victor, betrayal was not the shame. Being revealed by a black maid was. That was the part he could not survive. Victor's voice lowered. You're letting her make you look weak. Adrian's expression did not change, but the room felt the danger gather. No, Adrian said. She stopped me from becoming weak. The sentence landed harder than any shouted threat. Chairman Han watched the exchange with calm eyes. Clara translated softly for him, though he seemed to understand the meaning even before the words came. Some truths did not need language. Victor was taken toward the door. Before he left, he turned one last time. You think they respect you now? He spat at Clara. You're still staff. Tomorrow they'll hand you a mop and forget this ever happened. The guards dragged him out before anyone could answer. But his words stayed behind. Because cruel words often do that. They cling to the walls. They find old wounds. For the first time that evening, Clara looked down. Not in fear. In memory. She saw herself at 23, standing outside the university financial office, holding a letter that said her scholarship had been withdrawn. She remembered the woman behind the desk speaking gently but firmly, as if politeness could make devastation smaller. She remembered her mother in the hospital, trying to smile through pain. She remembered Marcus asleep in a clinic chair, his small chest rising unevenly, while Clara counted pills she could barely afford. Invisible women live longer. Mrs. Voss had told her that, and maybe it was true. But invisible women also watched doors close that they were qualified to walk through. They watched less capable people speak over them. They watched their names disappear from rooms where their minds belonged. Clara had survived by being unseen. But survival was not the same as living. Adrian noticed the change in her face. What did he say to you? Clara looked up. For a moment, she considered lying. Saying nothing. Returning to the safe shape of silence. But the room had already changed. Or maybe she had. He said tomorrow you will forget, she answered quietly. The words made the men uncomfortable. Not because Victor had said them. Because some of them knew they might have done exactly that. Adrian looked around the table. Slowly. Deliberately. Every man lowered his eyes except Chairman Han. Then Adrian pulled out the chair at his right side. The chair beside him. The chair no servant had ever touched. Sit down, Miss Bennett. Clara froze. Rocco looked up sharply. Even Chairman Han's eyebrows lifted. Clara shook her head once. Sir, I should return to the kitchen. No, Adrian said. You should finish the translation. His voice softened by a fraction. Unless you choose not to. That was what stunned her. Not the chair. Not the room. The choice. For months, Clara had been ordered, dismissed, summoned, corrected, ignored. But now the most dangerous man in the house had asked instead of commanded. Clara looked at the chair, then at the men who had laughed at her, then at Chairman Han, who gave the smallest respectful nod. Slowly, Clara sat. The room changed again. Not loudly, not dramatically, but everyone felt it. A maid had entered with tea. A translator now sat beside the boss. And the silence that followed was no longer humiliation. It was recognition. The contract was rewritten under Clara's voice. Not Victor's. Not the lawyer's. Hers. Page by page, clause by clause, Clara translated every change between Adrian Moretti and Chairman Han. She moved carefully through the language, preserving tone, respect, and warning. When Chairman Han spoke formally, she carried the formality. When Adrian answered bluntly, she softened nothing, but she shaped it so it would not become insult. That was the art no one in the room had understood. Translation was not replacing words. It was protecting meaning. At first, Adrian watched the papers. Then he watched her. Clara did not perform. She did not try to prove herself with dramatic gestures or clever phrases. She simply worked. Calm, precise, focused. Her voice moved between English and Korean as if opening doors in two houses she knew by heart. The Korean executives began addressing her directly, not as staff, as a professional. One asked about a shipping term. Clara clarified the legal nuance. Another questioned a phrase about liability. Clara explained the difference between a shared obligation and a hidden burden. Rocco stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. Maybe he was. The ghost of every woman he had underestimated. Chairman Han finally set down his pen and studied her. Your mother taught you well, he said in Korean. Clara's hands paused over the document. For the first time all night, her composure cracked. Only slightly. But Adrian saw it. Clara translated, though her voice was quieter. He said my mother taught me well. Chairman Han leaned back, his gaze softening with memory. Evelyn Bennett was one of the finest interpreters I ever met. At the Washington summit, Two delegations were ready to walk away because one sentence was mistranslated. She corrected it. Not loudly, not arrogantly, just truthfully. She saved the agreement. Clara looked at him. Her mother had rarely spoken about her achievements. Evelyn Bennett was the kind of woman who framed Clara's school certificates but kept her own awards in boxes under the bed. My mother never told me that story, Clara said in Korean. Chairman Han smiled faintly. Good people often remember the work, not the applause. Clara lowered her eyes. For a moment, the conference room vanished. She was back in their little apartment, watching her mother grade papers at the kitchen table. Evelyn wrapped in a faded robe. Tea going cold, red pen in hand, still correcting other people's sentences while illness was already stealing her strength. Language is dignity, Clara, her mother once told her. Never use it to make someone smaller. Clara had carried that sentence through every humiliating job, every unpaid bill. Every night, she felt her education slipping further away from her life. And now, inside a mafia boss's mansion, surrounded by men who once laughed at her, that sentence was breathing again. Adrian's voice brought her back. Miss Bennett. She turned. He held up page 12. This clause. The original version protects both sides. Yes. And the changed version would have trapped me? Yes. And Victor knew? Clara looked at the documents again. The messages suggest he knew exactly what he was doing. Adrian gnawed not at the contract, at the truth. Then Chairman Han said something else. Clara translated. He says he is willing to continue the partnership tonight, but only under one condition. Adrian's eyes narrowed. What condition? Clara listened. Then she hesitated. Every man noticed. Adrian leaned forward slightly. What did he say? Clara looked from Chairman Han to Adrian. He says I must remain as official interpreter for the rest of the negotiations. Rocco shifted in his chair. One of the capos almost objected, then thought better of it. Adrian looked at Chairman Han. The old man's expression was calm, but immovable. Then Adrian looked at Clara. For the first time, she saw no calculation in his eyes. Only a question, not whether she could do it, whether she wanted to. Clara's throat tightened. She had spent years being chosen only for the labor of her hands. Now she was being chosen for the work of her mind. Adrian spoke quietly. Miss Bennett, the decision is yours. The room waited. Clara thought of her mother, of Marcus, of every door that had closed. Then she lifted her chin. I'll finish the negotiation. Chairman Han nodded with approval. Adrian sat back. And for the first time that night, Clara Bennett did not feel like she had stepped into a room where she did not belong. She felt like the room had finally caught up to who she had always been. The new agreement took 2 hours. No one laughed again. Not once. The mansion seemed to hold its breath around the conference room. Outside, rain slid down the tall windows in silver lines. Inside, pens moved across paper, pages turned, and Clara's voice carried the room from danger to understanding. Adrian Moretti listened more than he spoke. That alone unsettled his men. They were used to watching him dominate negotiations by pressure, silence, and fear. But tonight, after nearly being manipulated by his own pride, Adrian became something more dangerous than angry. He became careful. Whenever a clause sounded unclear, he looked to Clara. Not Victor. Not Rocco. Not the lawyers standing awkwardly near the wall. Clara. Each time, she answered directly. No trembling. No apology. No shrinking herself to make powerful men comfortable. And with every answer, the hierarchy in the room cracked a little more. Rocco was the first to feel it fully. During a pause, he approached the sideboard for water and found Clara there, reviewing a document while pouring tea for herself. He stood beside her, shifting like a boy waiting outside a principal's office. Miss Bennett, he said. The title sounded unnatural in his mouth. Clara looked up. Yes. He cleared his throat. What I said earlier about soul. She waited. Rocco's face tightened with shame. It was ignorant. Yes, Clara said. A simple word. No anger. No softness. Just truth. Rocco nodded once. I'm sorry. Clara studied him for a moment. She could have punished him with silence. She could have humiliated him in return. But her mother's voice rose inside her. Never use language to make someone smaller. So Clara said, then remember it next time before the laugh leaves your mouth. Rocco lowered his eyes. Yes, ma'am. Across the room, Adrian had heard every word. His expression remained unreadable, but something in his gaze changed. Respect often begins not when a person shows power, but when they choose restraint. At midnight, the final pages were signed. Chairman Han placed his pen down first. Adrian followed. The agreement was no longer a trap. It was balanced, precise, and stronger because the lies had been cut out of it. Chairman Han stood. So did Adrian. The two men faced each other across the long black table. This time, no translator stood between them as a weapon. Clara stood slightly to the side. Chairman Han spoke in Korean. Clara translated. He says tonight could have ended in disaster. Instead, it revealed the truth. He says your house is fortunate, Mr. Moretti, that the person everyone overlooked was the only one listening. Adrian's eyes moved to Clara. For a brief second, the room saw the weight of that sentence land on him. Then he answered, "Tell Chairman Han he is right." Clara translated. Chairman Han smiled faintly. Then he turned to Clara and bowed. Not deeply, but formally, respectfully, a chairman bowing to a maid. The entire room saw it. Clara returned the bow, her throat tight. No applause followed. No dramatic music. Only silence. But it was the kind of silence that rearranged something inside every person present. The Korean delegation left soon after, escorted through the marble foyer beneath the glow of chandeliers. The doors closed behind them with a soft, final sound. Inside the conference room, Adrian's men remained. Waiting. Adrian turned toward them. From this moment on, he said, no one in this house speaks about Miss Bennet as if she is furniture. No one moved. No one laughs at staff. His eyes found Rocco. No one mistakes silence for stupidity. Then he looked at Clara. If she chooses to remain here, she will do so under a new title and a new salary. If she chooses to leave, she will leave with my recommendation, my protection, and every door I can open. Clara stared at him. She had expected punishment. Then maybe gratitude. She had not expected freedom. Adrian's voice lowered. You saved this family tonight. But more than that, you reminded me what arrogance almost cost me. The room went still. A mafia boss had just confessed a flaw in front of his men. That was not weakness. That was power learning humility. Clara folded her hands in front of her. Thank you, Mr. Moretti. Adrian shook his head once. No, Miss Bennet. Thank you. And for once, the words did not feel like charity. They felt like justice. The next morning, Clara woke before sunrise out of habit. For a few seconds, she forgot everything. The small staff room, the gray uniform hanging on the wardrobe door, the ache in her feet. Then memory returned. Victor, the contract, Chairman Han's bow, Adrian pulling out the chair beside him. Clara sat on the edge of the narrow bed and looked at her hands. The same hands that had scrubbed floors, carried trays, folded sheets, and wiped fingerprints from glasses powerful men drank from. Last night, those hands had held documents that could have destroyed an empire. Nothing about them had changed. And yet everything had. She dressed slowly, not in the gray uniform at first. She held it for a long moment, thumb brushing the sleeve. There was nothing shameful about the uniform. The shame had never been in service. Her mother had taught her that honest work carried dignity. The shame belonged to those who looked at service and saw permission to degrade. Clara put the uniform on. But this time, she did not lower her eyes when she stepped into the hallway. The mansion felt different in morning light. Softer, almost exposed. The marble floors reflected pale gold from the eastern windows. Staff moved quietly through their routines, though whispers followed Clara from room to room. Not cruel whispers. Astonished ones. Mrs. Voss met her near the dining room. The older housekeeper's face was stern, but her eyes were wet. I heard, she said. Clara nodded. Mrs. Voss reached out and adjusted Clara's collar with the tenderness of a mother who did not want anyone to notice she was proud. Invisible women live longer, Mrs. Voss whispered. Clara smiled faintly. Maybe visible women change more. Mrs. Voss looked at her for a long second, then nodded. Inside the breakfast room, Adrian Moretti stood by the window, dressed in a black shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. No jacket, no armor of formality. Just a man staring out at the rain-washed garden as if the world had become unfamiliar overnight. On the table sat 2 cups of coffee, one at his place, one at the chair across from him. Clara entered quietly. Good morning, sir. Adrian turned. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he walked to the table and pulled out the chair across from him. Not beside the wall, not near the service door. At the table. Good morning, Miss Bennet. Clara looked at the chair. The gesture was simple, That was why it struck so deeply. Men had offered Clara money before. They had offered extra shifts, overtime, instructions, warnings, and sometimes pity disguised as kindness. But very few had offered her a place. She remained standing. Mr. Moretti, I don't want anyone thinking I'm ashamed of service work. Adrian's expression shifted. I would never ask that. My mother cleaned classrooms after teaching in them, Clara said softly. She said work only becomes small when people make themselves bigger by stepping on it. Adrian absorbed that, then nodded. Your mother was right. Clara looked at the coffee, then at the chair. What happens now? Adrian reached into a folder on the table and slid a document toward her. Not a contract, an offer. Interpreter and cultural liaison for Moretti International Negotiations. Full salary. Medical coverage for her brother. Tuition reimbursement if she chose to complete her degree. Clara read the first lines and stopped. Her breath caught. Why? Adrian looked toward the window, then back at her. Because last night I saw a room full of men mistake your humility for weakness. I was one of them. The honesty landed quietly. No performance. No grand speech. Just truth. Clara sat down, across from him, as an equal human being, even if not an equal in power. Adrian poured her coffee himself. In the doorway, Rocco appeared briefly, saw Clara seated at the table, and lowered his head before walking away. The world had not become perfect overnight. Cruelty did not vanish because one man learned a lesson. But inside that room, something had been restored. A name, a voice, a future. Clara lifted the coffee cup, feeling its warmth settle into her palms. For the first time in years, she thought of calling the university. Not to ask for mercy, to ask what form she needed to return. Adrian watched her, then spoke quietly. Miss Bennett. She looked up. I owe you more than a job. Clara held his gaze. No, Mr. Moretti. You owe the next invisible person your attention. The words stayed between them. The rain stopped outside. Morning light broke through the clouds and touched the long table, the silver tray, the 2 cups of coffee, and the woman who had walked into a room as a maid and left it as the truth no one could ignore. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.